Why did rich people refuse to buy Rolex? Rolex has the pedigree and the history. It's what elites should be using. So why aren't they? Watch this video to find out, and it's not what you think. The watch nobody wanted. The story starts on a watch forum, in a thread that has been quietly running for years, under a title that asks a question most people are afraid to answer honestly. Does wealth actually want to be seen? A woman posted there describing a gold Rolex she'd inherited. She never wore it. Her daily watch was a Cartier tank. Plain, quiet, the kind of thing you could walk past 100 times without registering it existed. She wasn't hiding money. She had plenty of it. She just didn't see the point of a watch that announced itself. On a different forum entirely, a stranger told almost the same story from the other side of the mirror. Her father gave her a Rolex worth about $25,000. She was too nervous to take it out of the box. Eventually, she wore it to a cousin's wedding. Once. And noticed something odd. People assumed it was fake. Not because it looked cheap, because she'd never shown any interest in that kind of display before, and something about the mismatch made strangers doubt their own eyes rather than trust the watch. She never wore it in public again. 2 women, 2 Rolexes, 2 drawers. Neither story made headlines, neither woman is famous. Nobody photographed either watch for a magazine spread, and neither woman was trying to make a point when she wrote about it online. That's actually what makes both accounts worth trusting. Nobody stages a forum post about a watch they don't wear. There's no audience to perform for on a thread, with 40 replies and a handful of strangers arguing about status psychology at 1 in the morning. But put the 2 stories side by side, and a pattern starts to surface, the kind that shows up again and again once you start looking for it. People with real, quiet, often inherited money treating Rolex not as an aspiration, but as a watch they already outgrew, or one they never wanted in the first place. Here's the part that should stop you. Rolex isn't struggling. It just posted the best year in its history. $14 billion in sales in 2025, a first for the brand, according to the Morgan Stanley and Lux Consult industry report that tracks the Swiss watch business every year. So this isn't a story about a failing brand. It's stranger than that. It's a story about a wildly successful brand that a specific, quiet slice of the wealthiest people on Earth has decided isn't for them. And the reason has almost nothing to do with money. Have you ever inherited or been gifted a watch you never actually wore? Picture the drawer. Gold case, sapphire crystal, thousands of dollars, sitting closed for years while a plainer watch does all the actual living. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The easy answer. The obvious explanation shows up first, and it's tempting because it's simple. Maybe these people just don't care about watches. Maybe they're too busy, too practical, too focused on spreadsheets and board seats to think about what's on their wrist. That explanation falls apart fast. A lot of the people avoiding Rolex are serious collectors. They know movements, finishing, case tolerances, the difference between a stamped bridge and a hand-beveled one. They're not indifferent to watches. They're specifically, deliberately, indifferent to this one, and that's a different problem entirely. Indifference born of ignorance is boring. Indifference born of expertise is a verdict. Think about what that means for a second. If someone who doesn't know watches skips Rolex, that tells you nothing. But if someone who has spent years studying the industry, who owns pieces most people have never heard of, looks at a Datejust and feels nothing, that tells you the brand failed a very specific test. Not a quality test. Rolex passes every quality test there is. A recognition test. There's a second easy answer, and it deserves a fair hearing too, because it isn't wrong exactly, just incomplete. Some of these buyers say a Rolex simply reads as new money now, a watch for someone who just made partner or just closed the round and wants the world to notice. On threads discussing that exact idea, one commenter put it in blunt terms. A Datejust on the wrist of a company's co-founder felt, to them, like it screamed the wrong thing entirely. and they'd have found an Apple Watch less embarrassing on the same wrist. That's harsh. It's also honest, and it points at something the "they just don't care" theory misses completely. This isn't indifference to luxury. It's a very specific, very informed rejection of one particular signal. I'll be honest, this part bothered me the first time I sat with it properly. Rolex makes some of the most over-engineered, bulletproof watches in the world. The idea that the people best positioned to appreciate that engineering are the ones walking away from it feels backwards. But the more forum threads, industry reports, and old money etiquette guides I read, the more the pattern held. This isn't a fluke, it's a mechanism. And it's worth understanding exactly how it works, because the answer isn't really about Rolex at all. It's about what happens to any object the moment too many people can get their hands on it. There's a reason almost nobody at that level explains the choice out loud. It isn't modesty, and it isn't secrecy either. Not exactly. It's something a little colder than either of those, and we'll get to what it actually is before this ends. Hold that thought about the gold watch in the drawer too. We're coming back to it, because what eventually happened to it is the whole point of this video. That mechanism has a name, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in a single other luxury category. What Rolex actually sells. Here's the mechanism, stated plainly. Rolex did not fail to become exclusive. It succeeded, on purpose, at becoming the opposite of exclusive. And that success is exactly what makes it unreadable as a status signal to the people with the most status to signal. In 2025, Rolex sold roughly 1.15 million watches, according to converging estimates from the Morgan Stanley and Lux Consult report, independently reported the same way by multiple trade outlets. 1 million individual timepieces moving through boutiques and gray dealers worldwide. 1 million units a year, every year, for a company that's been running that machine for decades. The average price per watch landed above 14,000 francs, itself a record. But average price and rarity are not the same thing, and that's precisely where the confusion sits for most buyers. A million watches is not a scarce object. A million watches is a category. And once something becomes a category rather than an object, the people at the very top of the wealth pyramid, the ones for whom recognition itself is the risk, stop being able to use it to say anything at all. This is where old money and new money split. And the split isn't really about taste, even though it gets discussed that way. It's arithmetic. New wealth needs a signal that strangers can read instantly, because strangers are the audience. Old wealth, and the newer wealth trying to imitate its posture, needs a signal that only the right people can read, because strangers are exactly who they're trying not to perform for. A Rolex, at 1 million units a year, is built for the first audience. It is not built for the second. And the tell isn't subtle once you know to look for it. HBO's Succession became an accidental case study in exactly this divide, confirmed by the show's own costume designer, Michelle Matland, in interviews after the series ended. Kendall Roy, the character most visibly straining to prove himself, wears a heavy Richard Mille, the kind of watch built to be noticed. Nan Pierce, the matriarch of a rival dynasty and the show's true old money figure, wears a Cartier tank her character bought for herself decades earlier and never upgraded. Matland has said the difference was deliberate. It was never about how much either character could spend, only about what each one needed people to see. Watch forums picked up on the contrast almost immediately because it mirrored what they'd already noticed in real rooms. If a television costume department can encode this in fabric and steel, the real financial world encodes it far more precisely and with far higher stakes. The trap every status object eventually hits. Picture 2 rooms. In the first, a watch walks in and every head turns because almost nobody in the room owns one. In the second, 3 other people are already wearing the exact same watch. And nobody looks up at all. Same object. Same price tag. Completely different room and a completely different watch as far as status is concerned. Economists have a blunt name for objects that behave this way. Their value isn't just about what they do, it's about how few other people can get one. Push past a certain number, and the object stops being a signal and starts being a uniform. Nobody impresses anyone by wearing a uniform. Soldiers wear uniforms, flight attendants wear uniforms. The whole point of a uniform is that it tells you what group someone belongs to, not what sets them apart from it. And that is precisely the trap a mass-market luxury watch eventually falls into, whether the brand intended it or not. Rolex is not the first brand to hit this wall, and it won't be the last. Nearly every luxury category eventually produces a version of the same story. A symbol becomes so successful that its success becomes the very thing that disqualifies it from the room it was built to impress. The handbag world went through it. The sneaker world went through it. Twice. Watches are simply having their turn now, and Rolex, being the biggest player on the board, is the brand feeling it first and hardest. What makes this actually hard to fix, rather than just inconvenient, is that the trap tightens the harder you try to escape it through normal business logic. Raise prices, and new buyers upgrade their expectations to match, because the whole appeal was never really about the number on the price tag. Release rarer references, and gray market flippers absorb the rarity within months and resell it to exactly the crowd the brand was trying to filter out. Restrict allocation through authorized dealers, and a black market for relationships forms almost overnight, which is its own kind of very public secret. There is no lever inside a company selling 1 million units a year that produces the one thing genuine rarity requires: fewer units. Quick check. Does a watch feel more special to you when a stranger recognizes it, or when almost nobody does? This is why the independent watchmakers keep coming up in the same breath as instead of Rolex. They aren't solving the recognition problem by being better watchmakers, though several of them are. They're solving it by simply never entering the room where recognition became the product. F. P. Jern never tried to make 1 million watches and then had to walk it back. Recep Rexepi never had a viral moment that flooded his workshop with new demand he had to accommodate. The scarcity isn't a marketing campaign layered on top of the watchmaking. It's the ceiling the workshop was built with from day one, and ceilings like that are nearly impossible to fake retroactively. Which brings the conversation back to actual numbers, because scarcity sounds abstract until you see exactly how lopsided it really is. The math nobody runs. So, what does the alternative actually look like in numbers? Because exclusive is a word every luxury brand claims, and almost none of them earn. Patek Philippe, the brand most often invoked as Rolex's opposite, targeted about 72,000 watches for 2025, according to Patek's own released figures reported by trade outlets and cross-confirmed by independent industry trackers. Audemars Piguet's former chief executive has publicly said the company deliberately caps output near 50,000 pieces a year, a restriction confirmed across multiple industry reports, with 2025 figures placing it at 53,000 units and an average wholesale price of roughly 50,000 francs. Compare those numbers to Rolex's 2025 volume, and the gap stops being a difference of degree. It becomes a difference of category. Patek makes roughly 1 watch for every 16 Rolex makes. Audemars Piguet makes roughly 1 for every 22, at more than 3 times Rolex's average price. And that's still the accessible end of the alternative. Push further and the numbers get almost absurd. F. P. Jern, the independent watchmaker whose name comes up constantly in these forum threads, produces somewhere between 800 and 1,000 watches a year, a figure confirmed by the brand's own institutional materials and independently reported across multiple watch industry outlets. Rolex could produce an entire year of F.P. Jern's total output before most people had finished their morning coffee. Jern has also won the Aiguille d'Or, watchmaking's top prize, 3 separate times, so the scarcity isn't a substitute for skill, it sits on top of it. That is not a quality gap, it's a visibility gap, engineered on purpose. Somebody who owns a Jern is not betting that strangers will recognize the name. Almost nobody will. They're betting that the 2 or 3 people whose opinion actually matters to them will. Compare Rolex to the industry's other giant while we're at it, since it makes the point even sharper. Omega, its closest rival by volume, shipped somewhere around 460,000 watches in recent reporting. itself a huge number, and still less than half of Rolex's output. Even the second largest watch company on Earth isn't playing the same game Rolex plays. There is Rolex, at over 1 million pieces a year, and then there is essentially every other Swiss brand on Earth, clustered well beneath it. That gap alone should tell you something about why the mathematics of exclusivity simply cannot work in Rolex's favor anymore, no matter how good the movement inside the case is. Scale that large stops being a watchmaking story and becomes a logistics story, closer to consumer electronics than to the small Geneva workshops most people still picture when they hear the word Swiss. If you had to guess, which watch brand do you think holds the most quiet respect among actual collectors? That is the real trade being made. A Rolex says something to everyone, instantly, including the barista and the rideshare driver and the stranger in the elevator. A Journe, a Voutilainen, a Rexhepi piece, a Philippe Dufour, says almost nothing to almost everyone, and everything to the 4 or 5 people in the room who know exactly what it took to get one. For a person whose entire financial life depends on not being read by strangers, that second option isn't a downgrade, it's the entire point. To be fair to Rolex here, because it's earned. Nobody builds a movement as over-tested or backs it with a service network as vast, purely by accident. The company built its dominance through genuine engineering discipline across the better part of a century. That's exactly what makes the next part so strange to sit with. The same discipline that turned Rolex into an industrial powerhouse is the discipline that made it too recognizable for the room it once impressed the most. And the room that used to want Rolex the most has quietly moved somewhere else entirely. What they wear instead. Walk into a genuine family office, the kind that manages money across generations rather than one lucky exit. And you won't find a wall of steel sports watches. You'll find something closer to a private library. A Gronefeld here, made by 2 Dutch brothers who still build almost everything by hand. A Laurent Ferrier there, founded by a former Patek engineer who left to build watches nobody would immediately recognize on the street. Maybe a vintage piece with no logo at all, chosen specifically because it forces a conversation instead of skipping one. The pattern across every one of these choices is the same. None of them are trying to win an argument with a stranger. They're trying to avoid having that argument in the first place. There's a phrase that keeps surfacing in old money etiquette writing in slightly different words from authors who clearly haven't read each other. Quality should register at a glance to the people who matter and disappear to everyone else. That's not really a rule about watches. It's a rule about restraint, applied to whatever object happens to be on your wrist that day. One widely shared piece on the subject made the point almost offhandedly. Old money style, it argued, was never really about the size of the bank account. Some multi-generational families wear a $200 Seiko for 30 years because a grandfather handed it down. Some people, with no inherited money at all, adopt the exact same philosophy after watching one too many Daytonas get flipped for profit online and deciding they wanted no part of that particular circus. Money, in other words, was never really the variable driving the choice. Exposure was. And exposure is a taste you can develop regardless of what's sitting in your bank account, which is precisely why this pattern shows up in trust fund third generations and self-made engineers with equal frequency. And here's the quiet detail that says more than any production number could. Several of these independent workshops don't run waitlists the way Rolex does, with online forms and years-long queues managed by an algorithm. They run relationships instead. You don't get on a list. You get introduced by someone the workshop already trusts, and the watch you eventually receive was often finished, adjusted, and cased by one specific person whose name you could probably learn if you asked. Rolex will never be able to offer that at 1 million units a year. It isn't a flaw in the business. It simply isn't the business Rolex is in anymore, and hasn't been for a long time. Picture the two paths side by side, because the difference is not just in the numbers, it's in the entire experience of getting the watch at all. Path 1. You walk into a Rolex boutique on a Tuesday morning, and a very polite salesperson tells you the model you want isn't available today. Maybe not this year. You leave your name, buy a few other things to build a relationship with the store, and wait. Eventually, if you're patient and visible enough as a customer, a call comes. The whole system is designed deliberately to be legible. Anyone can walk in off the street and start the process. That's the appeal to 1 million buyers a year, and it's also exactly the reason it can never feel private, no matter how nice the boutique smells or how good the coffee is while you wait. Path 2. A mutual friend. Someone the workshop has known for a decade. Mentions you by name over dinner. Months later, an email arrives, quiet and specific, asking a few questions about what you actually want the watch to do and mean. There is no public waitlist to join, no store to walk into off the street, sometimes not even a public price list. The watch that eventually arrives was touched, at some point, by a person whose name is attached to a handful of other watches you could probably list from memory, because there are so few of them. Neither path is more honest than the other, but only one of them can be joined by simply having enough money, and that single fact is the whole story in miniature. Recognition is democratic by design. Scarcity, built on relationships, is not and cannot be, no matter how large the check someone is willing to write. There's a version of this instinct that goes even further than watches, and it's worth naming because it explains why the wealthiest people don't just downgrade their brand, they sometimes downgrade the entire category of object. One finance-adjacent discussion thread, populated by people self-reporting 8- and 9-figure net worths, put it almost clinically. Once you cross a certain threshold, the status games don't disappear, they just stop being about objects entirely. They migrate toward access to important people, toward extravagant spending on experiences instead of things, toward rare collectible objects nobody outside a tiny circle would recognize as valuable at all. A watch, in that world, is either invisible or irrelevant. There is no third setting. Would you rather own one watch nobody recognizes or 10 that everyone does? Honestly, I want to know. But there's a second reason for the retreat, and it has nothing to do with taste at all. The watch that paints a target. Remember the promise about something colder than modesty. This is it. It's simpler and darker than taste, and it shows up in crime data rather than forum posts. The Watch Register, the industry's largest database of lost, stolen, and counterfeit timepieces, logged 21 high-end watches reported stolen every single day in 2024. That's up from 19 a day the year before, and just 12 a day back in 2021. A trend independently reported across multiple insurance and security outlets. The register's own managing director confirmed the pattern held through 2025 too. 1,375 stolen or lost watches identified that year, up 21% from 2024. And of everything checked against that database by traders and private buyers, Rolex alone accounted for 44%, rising to 51% of everything actually registered as lost or stolen. That's not an accident of taste. It's an accident of recognizability. A Rolex is identifiable from across a street, through a car window, in a single glance from a passing scooter. Police departments from London to San Francisco have run undercover operations built around exactly that fact, planting officers in recognizable luxury watches as bait to catch organized theft crews who work high-end shopping districts in coordinated teams. One spots, one follows, one drives. The whole operation depends on the watch being loud enough to see from a distance. Boxer Amir Khan learned this the hard way in 2022, forced at gunpoint to hand over his diamond-set Franck Muller on an East London street after a fan's selfie taken earlier that day, showing the watch clearly, circulated online. Khan wasn't hiding his wealth generally. He'd built a public habit of posting watches like it on social media, and security professionals who studied the case afterward pointed to exactly that visibility, not the watch's value alone, as the thing that put a target on his wrist that night. Which means the calculation wealthy people are running here isn't only social, it's actuarial. A watch that announces its price to a stranger on the street announces it to the wrong kind of stranger too. Security consultants who advise high-net-worth families now routinely recommend keeping visibly expensive watches under a sleeve, off social media entirely, and out of any photograph carrying a location tag. Some clients keep the real piece in a vault and travel wearing a convincing substitute instead. Precisely so, a robbery if it happens, costs them nothing that actually matters. Put the social reason and the safety reason side by side, and they point in the same direction. Whether the goal is staying unreadable to a stranger measuring status or invisible to a stranger measuring opportunity, the solution looks identical. Wear the thing fewer people can name. Both reasons collapse into the same math, and the math always favors the object nobody else can identify. The cost of being recognized. Go back to the gold watch in the drawer. It sat there for years, untouched, while a much plainer Cartier did every bit of the actual work. Eventually, the woman who owned it gave it to a cousin starting a new job. Someone for whom a recognizable Rolex still meant exactly what it was designed to mean: arrival, not permanence. The watch didn't become worthless. It just moved down a rung to someone standing at the exact threshold Rolex was built to mark. And that is the real business Rolex runs today, whether the marketing admits it or not. It is not selling to the family office anymore. It's selling the entry ticket, the watch you buy, the year you make your first real money and want the world, correctly or not, to notice. That's an enormous, durable business. $14 billion a year, enormous. But it is structurally a different business from the one selling to people who no longer need the world to notice anything. Look at where Rolex has actually chosen to grow lately, and the entry ticket idea holds up even better. The brand's own certified pre-owned program, still relatively young, already accounts for around 5% of Watches of Switzerland's total turnover, ahead of Patek Philippe's pre-owned share at roughly 3.5%. That's not a program built for people who already have everything. It's a program built to catch the buyer standing at the door, the one who wants in but can't get an allocation at retail and is willing to pay a premium anyway to skip the line. Every part of that machine, the wait lists, the certified pre-owned counters, the boutique appointment systems, is engineered around demand from people trying to arrive somewhere. None of it is built around people who've already arrived and would rather not be noticed doing it. So, the ultra-wealthy person walking past a Rolex boutique without a second glance isn't snubbing the brand out of spite. They're reading it correctly. They already know exactly what the object communicates, and they've already decided that communicating it is the opposite of what they want. That's not really an insult. It might be the most honest compliment a watch this famous will ever receive. It did exactly what it was built to do, so completely that the people who no longer need it simply moved on without a second thought. The uncomfortable part is that Rolex cannot fix this even if it wanted to. Making fewer watches would mean giving up the very scale that makes the company the undisputed leader of its industry, the brand responsible for roughly a third of the entire Swiss watch market's value. Making more would only accelerate the same problem in the other direction. There is no version of a million-unit-a-year company that also feels rare to the people for whom rarity is the entire currency. Rolex chose its lane decades ago, and it chose it brilliantly. It simply isn't the lane that runs through the rooms where the quietest money actually lives. Nobody at the top walked away from Rolex because the watch got worse. They walked away because the watch got clearer, more visible, more universally understood, and clarity is the one thing real wealth has learned to avoid. The brand's greatest achievement, being recognized by nearly everyone on Earth, is the same achievement that priced it out of the one room where recognition itself is the risk. So will you also be moving away from Rolex? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more.